Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Katherine Peterson here with my co-host, Michael Regan. And today we have a guest that I'm excited about because he's one of my favorite mortgage friends, Tony Blodgett. And he is the EVP of Retail Sales at New American Funding. He's been there for about 11 years. Also, he's a certified mortgage banker, which is pretty rare and takes a lot of work to earn that designation. And it's something he knows a ton about. So I trust his opinion on all things mortgage. He also has his own podcast and stays busy with Market Shares podcast. So he's an experienced podcaster, hence his background if you're watching on YouTube. And so with that, I'm going to bring in Michael. Michael, thanks for being here.
Yeah, not a lot of setup on my end, Catherine. Really excited to be with both of you. Tony, would I be right in saying this is like bringing my two favorite Clubhouse hosts back to the future? Wasn't that where I found the two of you 5 years ago during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Clubhouse was a unique time, I think for all of us as we were going through COVID and, Clubhouse came about and it became quite the buzz for a while. And it was exciting. We did a lot of Clubhouse rooms. Catherine and I hosted Clubhouse rooms. So I spent a lot of time on there. And honestly, Michael, I thought it was the future of, kind of this audio communication, and then COVID went away and it just fizzled out just as fast, so but it's fun to look back on. We made a lot of friends in this industry during that time, and so I loved it for what it was at the time. But yeah, I think it was Clubhouse where we might have met at Building Champions events too in the past before that, but yeah, a lot of time was spent during Clubhouse.
For sure. No, you are right about that. We definitely had met before that, but it was really fun tuning in each week because you guys held a standing room at a standing time. I think Dave Savage decided to delegate everything under his brand to the two of you to run it. And you guys did a great job with that. And you're right, Tony, it was something that I think many of us thought might carry forward. But then I look at what you do today with market shares, and I think so much of that was a springboard for you into what you're doing today because you're a really excellent podcast host. So it's fun to have you on our show. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of had forgot about that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the amount of repetitions you get hosting a room like that, and there was no video, right? So it was easier than I think a podcast, but it definitely getting that many repetitions in, having to hold the room, carry the audience, keep conversations going. Those are definitely skills that I've brought forward, into the podcast and other areas of my business, to be honest with you.
I think that it was one of those times too where people would come for advice or a topic, and that I think was great because you had to think on your feet really quickly and be able to say something that was succinct, made sense, and kept people in the room because you could see when you were doing a bad job. That's one great thing with podcasting is you don't know when somebody stops it, but during Clubhouse times, you'd be like, the room is dying, or the room is building, or whatever that looked like. So that was like immediate feedback, which was great for learning and growing. So it was a fun
Absolutely.
time.
It was immediate feedback on how it is you're doing it at bringing people in. That's for sure.
So, Tony, we're probably diving right into the middle of a topic here, but this is a good one. You coach and lead a lot of people within your organization. And for our audience, I mean, you know the brand, but Tony really is the innovative leader of the retail stretch of this team. And they do a lot of you guys do a lot of great things in a lot of great markets. But one of the things that definitely changed since COVID is we have had to be more self-branded as originators. And to be able to follow a leader who's out front in that, not you're not some guy with NMLS number one who doesn't know what he's doing. You're literally showing them the way every day. Is it helpful for you as a leader to be able to say, you got this, I'm going to show you how?
Yeah, that was you bring up really good points, Michael. That was kind of my goal when I started the podcast. You don't see a lot of people in regional or national leadership roles that are doing this sort of thing. There's definitely a couple out there, but it's not normal for regionals and divisionals and people in national leadership roles to kind of have a podcast and really focus on building their personal brand. I think they think it's not as necessary as it might be for an individual originator. And I wanted to change that. I mean, that was really my goal, was to build a personal brand as a leader, and it has definitely had the impact of being able to show people the way. I have a lot of loan officers that reach out, they want advice on podcasts. I bring loan officers and other managers onto my podcast. Look, I don't need to do a podcast just because it's like a big name person, or I think it's going to get a lot of looks and clicks and all that stuff. For a lot of people, I bring them on because they've never been on a podcast. I want to give them that experience. I want to help them create some content that they can then repurpose and use on their social media. So I use the platform for that as well, to help people get introduced to it, realize that you don't have to just sit in front of a camera and come up with 30-second sound bites or 1-minute sound bites, which honestly is very difficult to do, and have it come off natural. Like, let's
Mhm.
just sit down, have a conversation, roll the cameras, and I guarantee you, out of 30 minutes of conversation, you're going to find some great sound bites that you can, put out, right? So, but yeah, it's helped a lot, Michael, to be leading in this space. And but I am also learning like everybody else, just trying to get better at it over time. And I think that when people see my commitment to it, because that was my number one thing with the podcast, I'm not going to start it and then quit. We're going to do it every single Friday. And I don't even know how many episodes I'm in. It's hundreds at this point, and we just keep going. And that was, I think, shows people the discipline that I was able to have with this. And when I tell people that's what it takes, at least I can say, look, that's what I'm doing. And it is working. I watch my metrics very closely. They're nothing amazing, but you guys, they're growing every single month. We've added some different strategies with some short, we take clips of our podcast. Obviously, I use little reels that I put on Instagram and LinkedIn. But even on YouTube, we're now breaking down some clips, and some of those are getting more views than even the full podcast. So there's, we're learning as we go.
Hmm. So Tony, one of the things I've always liked about you is that you're very relatable. So people can ask you questions about what it's like working on the street and originating loans every day, and you still have great advice about that, even though you are in management. And I think that's one of the reasons why your podcast is successful. But you've been in mortgage since I think you were probably legally old enough to work. But how have you been able to stay familiar with the street while you've been kind of escalating your leadership career and still keeping a tie to what's going on the ground?
Well, yeah. So I started mortgage at 19 years old, right out of high school, basically. Um, I think part of it, Catherine, is just my passion for the industry. My favorite part of the mortgage business is still working with clients. Now, I don't do that today, but I certainly miss it. And it was the part that I enjoyed the most at the time that I did it. And so part of it's just, I'm in a branch. I'm in one of our local branches right now, where the studio is. I talk to loan officers. I want their feedback. I want to hear from the street about what's going on. The reality is that you can't really be an effective leader of salespeople without really taking the time to understand what it is the salespeople are dealing with, because they already assume you're disconnected just simply because you're in a leadership role. They just assume you're disconnected. And so I think it's incumbent on us to take that extra effort to ask the questions and get the feedback, and just take an interest in it. And I also listen to a lot. I watch podcasts. I watch interviews with top producers. Dave Savage's YouTube channel. I watch it still all the time. And people might go, why? Like, those are all top producers. You don't originate. Like, what's relevant? I'm like, because I want to know what top producers are dealing with. It's super important to my role, and it does help keep me relevant with what's going on in the street.
Yeah, that sounds, Catherine, when I think back to our interview with Sean McCluskey, who I know Tony knows very well, he said something very similar. And so, Tony, my question is, where does that passion that you described come from? Was it just naturally in you, or were there leaders in your early career that inspired you and you started taking the mental notes of either, hey, that's the way I want to go, or maybe that's not the way I want to go? You don't have to lay anybody out, but who were some of your influences?
Well, I got really fortunate, I think, because I was so young when I got in the mortgage business. My dad owned a mortgage company, but I hadn't really been around the mortgage industry. What I saw of the mortgage industry was, my dad had a really nice house and a really nice car and a pool. And, I grew up without a lot of those things. And I'm like, well, if that industry can get me those things, like I want to do that. That was kind of, believe it or not, like all I really knew about mortgage. But, I
Mm.
started in 1997, and it was July 7th, actually, was my first day in the mortgage business. And that year, the sales manager who I was working under suggested that I go to Sales Mastery, Todd Duncan's event. And that was in October. So, what, a couple months after I got started in the industry, I found myself at Sales Mastery in 1997, and the likes of Tim Brahim and Barry Habib and,
Mm.
Stephen Marshall and these guys were up on stage. And I was like, awestruck by the things that they were sharing. I had no exposure really to the mortgage industry up until that point, and what that did for me is it painted a picture of like what was possible in this industry. And that got implanted on me like so early on, before I really had any other preconceived notions about what this industry was all about. Like that was really one of my very first introductions into what it meant to be successful in this industry. And so I feel like I've been pulled towards that literally my whole career. So as much as I didn't know what everyone was talking about. And what was fun, I wasn't even old enough to drink. So imagine that I'm at a mortgage conference and I'm not even old enough to drink. Of course, I didn't, right? Of course, I didn't when I was there. But being that young and having that impression on me has really pulled me through. I think that's what sparked it originally. As far as what keeps me going and the passion for it, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I love this industry. I love what it is that we do. It's just kind of like in your blood. And I just want to, since I've had so much success in this, I want to help more people have that level of success. And I think that's what drives me every day.
Yeah, that's huge. And that comes through in what you do. I've seen it in different things I've done, and you definitely are pouring into others. So thanks for that. So then Tony today, Tony is a 19, 20-year-old. If you could go back and go to sales mastery with your younger self, what wisdom would you give that 19, 20-year-old?
Well, look, despite everything I learned and was exposed to during that first sales mastery, to say that I implemented it right away,
Yeah.
it would not
Right.
be true. So I can look back on that, and like that was like the guiding, that like set the stake out there of what was possible. But I certainly didn't implement it right away. It took me years. That probably took me 7 or 8 years before I even hired my first assistant. So I feel like I probably could have scaled up my origination business quicker, had I implemented more effectively some of those things, had I entered into coaching and some of the other things that I did later in my career that really accelerated my growth. Um, but I don't look back with any regrets. I'm kind of glad in a way of the trajectory of my career. I mean, I made really good money. I was successful at a very young age, but could I have done more? Yeah. But what I probably would have told myself is that, I mean, now it's 30 years later, guys. So, I mean, because I was working a little bit in escrow and as a courier, 2 years before that. So really, I'm 30 years around this industry, 28 years, after starting my career as an originator. And I would tell myself, like, you got 30 years, man. Like, don't put too much pressure on yourself.
All right. So that makes me curious, Tony. If we could go back 28, 30 years ago, would people recognize that guy that they met and the guy that they meet today? Would people have seen in you what you've experienced over that period of time, or would they be blown away at the trajectory of your career?
Good question. I mean, I can't imagine that they would see that in me back then. Obviously some people believed in me because at 19, 20 years old, I had real estate agents that were referring me their clients, so they must have seen something in me. I've always built my business by referral only, and by taking care of people and giving good advice. And so I think that piece of it was there. But look, I've learned so much over the years. I think my level of, I think I'm I was probably a little more cocky back then. I was probably a little more, fast paced in the way that I did things. I was quick to react to things. That's different now than it is. That probably comes with age and wisdom and all of those things. But no, there's probably elements that people could look at back then and see. I feel like a completely different person over the last, 5 years of my career than the 25 years before that. To be honest with you, I feel like I've done a lot of growth in the leadership space and really just on myself over the last couple of years. And so for me personally, looking back, I don't see the same person in me today that I was back then, but there may be elements of it that other people, would see. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a fair answer. And Catherine, you and I just sat together recently at the Housing Wire event in Colorado with a lot of leaders. So Tony, I mean, these are people that are clearly in your peer group. Patty Arvielo there on the stage. We got to listen to her present, and what a great following she has at an event like that. She inspires people. Doesn't matter whether they're wearing your brand. Like, she's just one of those people that inspires other leaders. And it was great to hear her on the stage. Um, Catherine, when I hear Tony talk about that journey over the last 28, 30 years, what are some of the things that in your mind, we need to explore with Tony as it relates to where he's taking his leadership journey in the future? Because in my mind, this is one of the guys that was on the stage. We just missed him in Colorado Springs. He's definitely one of the guys we want to hear from.
Yeah. So to me, when I kind of think back, I think there's probably a few moments that you can think of in your past that kind of changed your trajectory. And I think that's something I don't know about you. So I would like to hear those moments because I just don't know what they are. And I'm curious because I think that's pretty fascinating to hear from leaders.
Yeah. You know, because my dad owned a mortgage company and I worked there for 9 years, I think that right from the get-go was like, well, it's my dad's company. So like, I want to run this someday, right? Isn't that like you want to take over the family business, right? So I think that idea got put into my head very early on. Now, how I was going to accomplish that and acquire the skills to be able to justify that happening, that's what I had to pick up on over time. But there has always been this thought that like I want to run a mortgage company, and before I came to New American Funding, that's what I did. I was the president and COO of a mortgage company. That was like my dream job, right? And so I've been able to realize that throughout my career, and it's probably because that was my intention. You can't deny that what you put your intention on, in my experience, comes to reality. And so I had that intention, but I didn't know how I would get there. I would say, though, to more directly answer your question, Catherine, for me, the big pivots, one of them was being able to make the transition out of origination. It's very difficult in this industry to say, I want to be a leader in this industry, but I'm willing to give up my production, especially if you're a top producer and you're earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in a very successful mortgage practice. And so that pivot was very difficult for me to do, both because I was letting go of the part of the job that I really enjoyed doing, and I had to figure out with my leadership team at the time how financially I could navigate that transition without going broke, but also without significantly impacting the company that I worked for at the time, because I was one of the top producers. And so that
Mm.
situation alone was probably one of the most challenging. It took me years. It took me years to figure that out and fully make that transition in a way that it worked for me and it worked for the company that I was working at the time. And then getting on the other side of that really allowed me to then say, okay, I'm a non-producing executive in the mortgage space, and then I can own that and then grow within that space instead of always having my foot into the production side. And I think that's where I was able to take my leadership to the next level and make it my priority, and really like burn the boats. Like, there's no going back. I gave up my book. I'm like, I'm not going back to origination. And when you can embody that sort of an idea, to give you an example, when I came to New American Funding after we sold Mortgage Advisory Group, I didn't have any loan officers in tow with me. And I'm doing the math and I'm like, I got to go from zero to $40 million a month in production. And I got to do that in 12 months, or I'm going to not meet my income goals and probably go broke. So, like, and you could not fathom doing that if you had to do it as a producing manager and growing it step by step and loan officer by loan officer. It completely changes your perspective and what your what your needs are, what you need to accomplish. But you also can believe in that. It would be no different than a loan officer saying, I'm just moving to a new city and I got to get to 10 loans a month. You go, okay. I mean, if you're a top producer, you could be like, that would be difficult, but I could do that. As someone who had given up all production, you got to be in control of a lot more transactions in order to make the same amount of money. But it does allow you to have that perspective. And then at least in my experience, at least for me, I was able to accomplish that. So, that for me was probably the big pivot, was getting out of origination, moving into being a non-producer, and still being able to sustain the lifestyle that I wanted and embody the mindset necessary to be successful at that sort of a role.
All right, so that's immediately making me think of a couple of questions I want to ask, but I'll start with, we'll stay in this lane. Were there influencers at that time, people in your life as you're making that transition? Because it sounds to me like, I mean, literally necessity is the mother of all motivation. I mean, you had to figure this out, but you had to also trust some other people. Did you have those people? Did they keep you in alignment, or were you just this guy who's like, get out of my way, I'll figure it out? How did that actually happen?
I didn't really have anybody that I could model after, if that's what you mean. Like, oh, I just saw someone go through that. So, there's some mentorship there. I didn't really have that sort of an example to lean on. But I will tell you that the owners of the company that I used to run, Mortgage Advisory Group, I mean, they were very supportive of me making that transition. And one of the owners, he would give me books to read and, different, ideas about, making that transition. So there was definitely some mentors that helped me along the way. But I also knew that, because like when I was like an EVP, or maybe I was even president of the company, and I still had production, and I'd go to these, you know, yeah, as a president of a company, you get invited like round tables, sometimes different events, right? And I'd be the only guy in the room that's still doing loans. And you might think that, oh, well, you should wear that like a badge of honor, but no one else in the room thought so. Like, they thought a little bit less of you because you still got your foot in origination. Like, you're really not an executive, you're still slinging loans, And so for me, I just took it as, I need to be able to make that leap, and I need to figure out how I can make my life and my finances and my goals, work without that. And I'll tell you, it's not an easy thing to do. And matter of fact, you see a lot of people right now who made that move that are going back to production, because this is an industry that's been squeezed when it comes to leadership, and rightfully so. We don't need a bunch of layers necessarily in the mortgage business. I mean, there's an appropriate amount of support that's necessary to run an operation, but you know there's many people that I know that went that route, gave up production, and now are trying to get back into production. I've tried to go the other way and just get further and further, up the ladder, as the alligators are, the water's rising, and you gotta, stay above the fray. So I've just leaned into that, I guess. Michael leaned into doing what was necessary to make that my career.
All right. So the other question, Tony, was, as I listened to Catherine set that up, I'm wondering as well. I mean, we're focused obviously on you in the professional context. Was there anything on the personal side that felt like a pivot for you? Because I've seen you also elevate in the way that you engage with people. You've elevated in the way that you lead people. Again, is that just your natural style, or was there a pivot point for you in which that really changed?
I would say there's probably lots of pivot points, along my life. But if I'm being honest with you, the biggest change for me has been over the last couple of years. I just celebrated 2 years of no alcohol. I stopped drinking alcohol May 1st of 2023. I'd taken some breaks in the past before that, That was huge for me, and it's interesting because a lot of people have different stories around alcohol, and a lot of people, they come to the realization they don't want to drink alcohol because they hit like a rock bottom. And that wasn't my experience. I was still, um, you know, very successful in most people's accounts, but for me, I knew that there was more that I could give. There was more that I kind of required of myself. And I felt like I'm getting older. I'm 48 years old, and so my health became a bigger factor. So over the last couple of years, from quitting drinking alcohol, really focusing on eating food that is intended to fuel my body as opposed to things that just taste good. I've made that shift. I really track my exercise, my sleep. All those things have become more important. And I'll tell you, for me, getting my body into shape and my mind into shape through those activities has significantly, I feel like, improve my ability to lead other people. And I don't push it on people. I don't really care what people do. I go to events all the time. People drink. I don't care. It doesn't bother me if people drink around me. Matter of fact, I probably have beers in my fridge right now. It's not a thing where I think about that whatsoever. It's had no impact on what I feel about other people. It was really a personal decision. And you know, and I'm glad that I did it because I feel I'm operating at the highest that I ever have, and yet I still want to continue to get better at what it is that I do. But that's probably a big pivot, Michael. Is it started? I'll say this about quitting drinking alcohol is that you can have fitness goals, right? Which I did. Like, I'm going to start going to the gym. I'm going to eat right. But then if you're drinking a bunch of beers on the weekend, you're like, they're so counter to each other. It's hard to reconcile in your head a commitment towards health in other parts of your life when you're sitting there, on the other hand, having a couple glasses of wine before you go to bed, So for me, as much as those other things had started becoming more of a priority, I wasn't able to truly get them in line until I made the decision to stop drinking the alcohol. And then the other things that I had kind of started working on all of a sudden started falling into place for me. And now it's easy for me to stick to, I don't even want to call it a diet, but stick to, a food program that's right for my body. Let's say that. And it's easier for me to stick to my exercise routines and all the things that we all know we need to do, but it's always got like an asterisk next to it if you're also, in my opinion, still drinking. At least for me, I couldn't reconcile those things because I'm like, man, I can't stick to this. I can't stick to a diet plan. I can't do any of those things. And it's like, well, for me, it was the alcohol that needed to go first, and then boom, 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 everything else kind of lined up for me. So it's been huge. I don't, like I said, I don't like to talk about it too much. I get a little awkward about it because I'm not here to try to change anyone else's perspective. But if I'm telling you what's worked for me, that's been huge. And I hear about it from a lot of people. So
Yeah, congratulations, because I think that's big, and I definitely see a difference in you. So good job
yeah,
with that. Um,
thank you.
and now we've talked a little bit about the past, we've talked about the present, so I'm going to kind of shoot things forward into the future a little bit. So what do you see the future of this industry looking like? What are the things that you're thinking about at night as you project forward? Because I think you've always been so good at looking ahead, and I'm curious to just see your thoughts on the industry and what you project for yourself and your company and the industry moving ahead.
Yeah. So there's no question in my mind that more and more consumers are going online to start the mortgage lending journey. There's just no question about that. The data speaks for itself. That's happening. Now, I still think we're in a world where we can do an effective job of, they may start their journey there, but then they meet a realtor and the realtor says, "Hey, you got to use my guy Tony. He's a great loan officer," and we can still divert that business back. But the opportunity to do that, I think, is going to become less and less available to us because I think the younger generations are more comfortable completely transacting in a digital sort of an environment. And so, as I think about where the industry is going, I think that the loan officer still plays a huge role, but the loan officer has to adapt to recognizing that the majority of their clients, first of all, are going to start the journey online and they're going to do their research on you. And this is happening today. It's only going to evolve as we move forward. So, hence the building of a personal brand, right? Making sure that you have your presence on the website. But then the next thing is the technology to support that digital transaction that the younger home buyers are going to be looking for. I mean, people enjoy it now. People expect it as you get younger and younger into the home buying age. And so, the technology has to be there. You're going to have to align with an organization or a platform or whatever the case may be, where you can provide the experience that the future homeowner is going to want to enjoy. So that's something that we're 100% focused on, is making sure that the technology suite is such that it is a frictionless kind of Amazon kind of an experience for the buyer, with the ability for the high touch relationship, interaction with a loan officer, because I don't think that completely goes away. The other thing that we're, specifically focused on is, you know, how do we help cultivate that business that's going online and direct that back to the, local retail loan officer that's on our staff. So that's something that's a big focus for our company in particular. And I think we have some pretty amazing solutions in place for that. But it's just helping them capture that percentage of the business that otherwise is going to go somewhere else, right? I think that we're going to be competing more against, and you're seeing this with all the aggregation going on. You notice every acquisition that's happened, including the one that was just announced yesterday of Guild, was an acquisition by a servicer. So we either see companies buying servicing companies or servicing companies buying mortgage companies or real estate companies, online, real estate firms, the Redfin, the Mr. Cooper. What that tells me is that they want to control both the real estate purchase experience, the mortgage experience, and the servicing experience. And it's driven primarily by the servicer in that case. And so, they want to provide that all-in-one solution. And so we got to recognize that that's what we're up against moving forward. And I don't think all of them are going to do a great job at executing on that, but there is no denying that when you control all aspects of the transaction, there's probably more margin there for you to shift around and lower someone's cost. Now, can you provide the experience that they want? Like, that's to be determined, but that is the challenge, and that's what we're up against in our industry. And so, I think that we need to plan for that as individual originators. You got to think about that. And for a lot of people, it might be aligning with companies that can provide that. For others, it's like, look, I want to stay independent. Fair enough. Do that, but recognize what it is that the consumer ultimately is wanting, because these moves in the mortgage industry aren't happening out of an accident. These are happening because people are seeing the future and they're predicting what the future homeowner wants. And there's a lot of money and research that has gone into this. And the stats that we can see even today are supporting it. So don't go like, oh, that Zillow thing's never going to work, or that Redfin thing's never going to work, or that, Guild thing, it's not going to work. Like, I would caution people from thinking that. I would say, okay, why did they do that? What are they trying to accomplish? And how can I provide a similar experience to the consumers that I want to work with? That might be a better way to frame it, I think, for loan officers today, looking at what's going on in our industry versus, oh yeah, that'll never work. It's like, well, they've invested a lot of money. Even if it doesn't work at first, they're going to tweak it and try to find ways of making it work, and they will capture business. And I think Rocket is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, a lot of smart people in this industry. They're not making these decisions in a vacuum. They've looked at the data, they've done the research, and they've had this. They didn't just fall off the turnip truck either. They've been building on this for 20 years. It's just taken a long time to get here. But you said something really interesting, and I hope our audience heard it. Is let's remember the customer's perspective in all of this, because they drive a lot of the reason this innovation exists. as that modern consumer. And every day, you know, fewer of us with these gray hairs are writing 30-year mortgages, and the audience coming up behind us, they have no problem with going to an app. They have no problem with dealing with a bot. They have no problem exchanging information without ever meeting a person. That's the way they think. And so you're very wise for at least being open to the idea that we've got to learn about this. We've got to figure this out. But Tony, here's the question I want to ask. You're responsible for leading a group of people who do still look like you and me. And they're trying to figure out, wait, how do I make it in that transition? How do I do this? How are you coaching your people to recognize that we don't have all the answers yet, but we're all well aware that we're in the middle of this change? How do you keep them going?
Yeah, well, the first thing is like, don't be afraid of it. I think fear will paralyze people. Fear will allow people to to rationalize their decisions and their complacency and all those things. So the first thing is like, don't be afraid of. What I'm saying is not intended to be fearful for anybody. It's like, this is just the reality. So I think the first thing is you we agree that this is what's happening, okay, and don't be afraid of it. I also think that as an organization, at least then, again, just my perspective, as an organization, we try to say, how can we support it, right? How can we give you the tools to give the consumer what they want? And you also have to realize that some of them are going to go a different direction. Like, we all know this in the mortgage industry, it's a numbers game. You're not going to get every transaction. And so, we don't want to necessarily become what someone else is doing. We want to acknowledge what they're doing and say, well, what does that mean for the consumer? Well, what could we do to provide the consumer what they're trying to provide them, but maybe do it in a better way? So it starts with, first of all, not being fearful, this idea that this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over time. I think that we can't bury our head in the sand and act like it's not happening. And I think that what we're trying to do is say, we recognize what's happening. So we're going to build both technology. We're going to build processes to help you capture that online business, and we're doing that. And supporting them building a business, like, meaning their own personal brand. Like, we're more flexible than ever at letting people, we have some that are DBAs, we have some that are building their own personal brand. I mean, these are things that 5 years ago we wouldn't have considered at New American Funding, and yet we're supporting those things at a high level today because we recognize that's what the future originator is going to ultimately want and need, and doing so while still protecting what's important to us about our brand and the value of building the New American Funding brand. You got to kind of do both, and recognize that they both have value. If we're going to help capture online business, a lot of that's going to come from the work that we've done to brand the organization as a dominant online lender. But yet, how do we funnel as much of that business as we can and that reputation that we've built to our individual loan officers, and then help them build out their personal brand? So it's a lot of things, Michael, happening at the same time, and we have to be I'm a person who can hold many different things to be true at the same time that may seem like they conflict with each other, but they really don't. I mean, you could pin them against each other and make them feel like they're in conflict, but they can all exist simultaneously, and we can push on all these different directions, supporting both the call center business, supporting the consumer direct, or the retail loan officer business, providing technology that supports all of it. You know what I mean? Like, all these things are possible simultaneously, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think a lot of it, when you say, how do you keep people motivated, is talk about it. You got to be willing to talk about it. You can't be afraid of what's happening in the industry around us. We got to ask why questions. Why is that happening? What is their motivation for buying that company? What are they trying to accomplish? Whether they do it or not, like, what were they thinking? Should we be thinking that way?
Tony, it's exciting to hear you speak this way. Catherine, I'm sitting here thinking, we got to get Tony running for office. We need more reasonable people like this running in public space, not private space. But don't give up your day job yet, Tony. You're still doing great work here. Catherine, there's so much to cover here, and of course I want to cover more, but I want to give you the final word today with our guest, Tony Blodgett. So any closing thoughts or any closing questions for our guest?
So I think one of my takeaways, which is going back to the beginning of our time together, is so many times I think in your leadership journey, you've just said, well, that's just like I was going to run a company, and I didn't know how I was going to get there. That was just in my head. And I think so many times it's like we know we're going to get there, whether that be with AI or what that, in the future. And I think a lot of times the steps kind of work their way out, and they align as you walk. So that's kind of my takeaway from today. And thanks for sharing that. I think it's been great to spend time with you, and it makes me miss you more. So I'm glad that we got some time today together, and I'm glad that we got to share Tony with our audience too, because he's definitely a great leader in our industry and has a lot of insight. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, well, what you're referring to there, Catherine, is really at the end of the day, it's vision, right? I've heard
Mhm.
Michael talk about this a lot. I've heard you talk about this
Yeah.
a lot. You can call it intention, you can call it vision. There's something weird that happens in this world, and it's that when you can cast a vision that's clear enough, even doesn't matter how far out it is, somehow we get pulled through that, and the steps to get there kind of reveal themselves along the way if you can be clear on that vision. And that's kind of what
Mhm.
I hear you saying, and I believe in that 100%. And that's why oftentimes when I get asked about it, I'm like, I can't explain I can't exactly explain how it happened, but I can tell you I was crystal clear on what I wanted to accomplish, and every step to get there, it just happens a day at a time. So no, I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Well, that's a beautiful way to wrap up this episode. Tony, thanks so much for being with us. Catherine, as always, it was great. Today was our Clubhouse reunion episode, and we brought my favorite two Clubhouse hosts back together for another great recording of Building Bigger Lives. To our audience, thanks for joining us as always. We appreciate having you. Go check out Tony's podcast. We'll put some links to that as well. You're going to like Market Shares. He does a lot of great things over there. And as a thought leader, he's taking his topics and content in directions that we don't. So go cross-pollinate the shows. I think you'll enjoy that as well. Thanks for joining us again today. We'll look forward to seeing you as we do every Wednesday on a Building Bigger Lives podcast coming soon. Thank you.